Okay, three types of the EJB: entity beans, session beans, and the message beans. Okay, actually, an entity bean just references a row in a database table, providing an object representation of database object. For example, an entity bean could represent a customer, and changing the value in that entity bean would cause update to the database row. So we can see that entity bean. Yeah, you know the Java program is OOP, right? So entity bean is just to represent an object. Now here, in most cases, entity bean is always used to represent some records of a database. If the value of the property of the EJB changes, then this value will be reflects on the database, Okay, this is called entity bean. Now, please remember, entity bean is not only used on the database, it can be used for other application scenarios. Here, we just provide you an example. Can you understand? Okay, then entity beans provide an abstraction layer so that working with the entity is not specific to the storage mechanism for that entity. Okay, so entity provide an abstraction layer so that working with the entity is not specific to the storage mechanism for that entity. So please remember that you know that the entity being just represents the records of the database. So from the perspective of the application, we can see that we can just communicate with the entity being instead of what? The real database. The real database. So we can just consider the entity being as a what? Is an abstraction layer. Is an abstraction layer. So we just connect to the entity being. We just make operations on the entity being, and all these operations, all these value changes can be also reflected on the database later. Okay, so this is advantages of the entity bean. This is a useful application scenario of the entity beans. So here, read this slide by yourself for 2 minutes to understand what is the entity bean. Okay, why we say entity bean just to provide an abstraction layer. Okay, 2 minutes.